Greetings, nerds. This is CNN Nerd. I'm your host, Sarah Belmont, and with me, as always, is our Mr. Producer, Will Paul. How are you doing today, Will?
Doing very well, sir. How are you this afternoon?
I'm doing fine. You know, there's a lot of superhero stuff going on in the world these days, a lot of shows,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and yet I binged something entirely out of the genre this weekend.
Oh yeah? What's that?
I did. It's more of an 85% binge. I didn't really watch every single episode. I skipped around a lot. But I just randomly got sucked into the show Victoria, which I found on Amazon, but it's Masterpiece Theater.
Ah.
So it's this weird hybrid between The Crown and Downton Abbey.
Gotcha. Huh.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting. Speaking of The Crown, I saw where I think one of the actor who's playing Prince Philip kind of spilled the beans that they may be coming back in November. So.
Yeah, I saw that too, and it got me a little bit excited. However, I do like that show dropping in December. It's like a good Christmas treat binge.
Yeah. Definitely.
But it's going to be so weird without Claire Foy.
Yeah, it is. And Matt Smith. I've gotten so used to them as being the leads. It's like, just age them. Don't recast everyone. But I guess they wanted to go the other route.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious of how it's going to be because it's the only show that's doing that. So I wonder if it's going to work, but we'll have to wait until November.
We'll have to. Yeah, I also this past week, speaking of non-genre binges, football season coming up. My favorite team, the Carolina Panthers, was the subject of Amazon's All Access this year. And,
yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, it was really, really good. I know, typically once training camps start, of course, there's the well-known series Hard Knocks, focuses on some poor team that sucked the year before, and here's their chance to become relevant again through this show, at least for during the month of August. But but the Panthers one was really good, just chronicling the last season and a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that transpired, and I really enjoyed it. Got me my mindset up ready for football season since it's here.
I'm sure that's not why you're on today and wanting to talk because, and I quote for our listeners, you sent me a DM this weekend, which basically was just like, we got to talk Swamp Thing because I have some thoughts. And I'm like, I want to hear them.
Yeah, you responded in kind, and I was just like, yes, I want to hear those as well.
So the episode that dropped on Friday, Anatomy Lesson, it was interesting, but it's very jarring from watching shows like The Boys or Krypton, which we'll talk about later today, and watching this show, and I'm like, there's such a fracture of storylines going on, and all I really care about is the Abby and the Swamp Thing, Alex stuff, and there was portions of this episode that was heavily about Alec, heavily about Swamp Thing, and then they're just like, oh, we're gonna throw in this Blue Devil stuff that makes no sense. I'm still very confused why it's important to this show, and I feel like it's just wasting time, along with all of the Sunderland melodrama that they spiced in it, to the point where he locks up Maria in a psychiatric ward, and I'm just like, yeah, he should have done that like 5 episodes ago. What's wrong with him?
Yeah. And that's where that's where my DM to you, because I had watched episodes 8 and 9 back to back. And this episode really captured what happens when a series is canceled while in production, and not only canceled, but also episodes being reduced from 13 to 10.
Yeah.
And we picked on that some point when we discussed episode 7, which I think was the last Swamp Thing we recapped.
Mm-hmm.
We did not recap episode 8. 8 actually, I thought it was a true bridge episode. It was a lot of just weird stuff with Sunderland and him hallucinating in the rot. And we did get some good stories with Abby going back to Atlanta, the CDC, and some of the, I guess, the conclave, their interest in what she's learned in Louisiana. But when we get to this episode, just for the things you just mentioned, it was, I'll get the bad stuff out of the way first, because that's where my thoughts were when I sent you that DM. It was just all over the place. And for a penultimate episode, I guess this is where having too much knowledge was a bad thing, as far as the behind the scenes stuff. Because if I didn't know all the behind the scenes stuff, I probably still would have been frustrated with the episode. But because I know what happened behind the scenes, as far as the cancellation and reduction in episodes, it really, like, it just stuck out like a sore thumb. For example, Blue Devil. And part of it is the fact that Dan Cassidy, Blue Devil is a character in the comics. I didn't really pick up on that point until it was frustrating me to the point where I was like, okay, I got a wiki. Who is Blue Devil? And so I discovered, actually there is a character in the DC universe that is but Blue Devil, and it was just a blind spot. So but even so, it really doesn't fall under the Swamp Thing stories. It was more Blue Devil was a character. The backstory was created, but I guess to the show's credit, and if they had opportunities to go further, they were just trying to expand the universe in the DC universe that we have come to anticipate with all these shows, whether on DC TV, where they bring characters in. But it was just so, for a penultimate episode, and if things had like gone the way they wanted, whenever they got word that things are not going to be able to unfold the way they should have like cut that storyline. It just
yeah. I mean, what's the point of expanding a universe that is basically one and done? I mean, and honestly, the viewers who are watching it, we don't care about Blue Devil. We never wanted Blue Devil. We want to know about Swamp Thing. And I'm glad you reminded me that this is literally the penultimate episode. I have no idea what we're building to. Like, a penultimate episode should have this moment of revelation, and there was kind of it, but there was also more character building than anything that really occurred, which is fine for earlier episodes, but at this point in time, you're really building to your climax of your entire season, and I didn't feel that during this episode. I felt like it was much more of a character building episode, probably also a filler to bridge some of the gaps and get all those characters where they need to be. Yeah, at this point, I'm like, I don't really know where we're going. Next episode is going to be the end, and then that's it. And I mean, it's kind of unfortunate because there's a lot of seeds. Thank you. That that they've planted. But I mean, really, all they're doing with the Blue Devil is just weed that needs to get torn out, because it doesn't, it's so random. So, like, the Sunderland melodrama, I'll give you that, because at least there's ties into Abby, where she comes from, who she was before all of this. But this whole Danny nonsense, that's all it is. It's just nonsense.
Yeah. And the scenes that they had when the Blue Devil did come and came to Abby and Liz's rescue, that's not the Abby and Liz that we've known this season. Abby has been a very proactive, very strong character, not one that needs to be rescued in the traditional trope format. And that scene was just like, okay, one, they were savvy enough not to get themselves caught in that situation, but two, it just given the tone and how they have structured this series, building up to the 7th and 8th episode, I felt like I was watching a different series all of a sudden. And I was very disappointed because I really, this was a gem of a series this year, as at least the first half of it. And then because of having to, and we talked about this before, we saw that in episode 7, we saw the shift in the story and how they had to okay, we got to just completely blow up the Bible and just redo it here on the fly to basically tie up all these ends. Mm-hmm. And Blue Devil, Xanadu got the axe some time ago. We haven't seen her. And so bringing this forward now, I'm like, okay, I know y'all got to finish out Danny's story. Fine. But you didn't need to devote that much to it. The real thing, I guess that was my biggest qualm. And then also how the Sunderland storyline has sort of evolved and went from being very, very intriguing. And even with I loved how a few episodes back with Maria and Lucia, and they're working together to basically take out Avery.
You loved that. I hated that, and that's the point where I'm like, this show doesn't know what it is anymore. This is very manic.
Right. Yeah, it is. It is. And again, it goes back to my earlier point. Because I know too much, it definitely colors my viewership of it. And even if I didn't know any of those things, to your point, it is very, very manic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, speaking of manic and some of the good that was in this episode that I really did like and was really interesting.
Yeah. It's a very bipolar series. Yeah.
Is the whole melding between Alec realizing that Alec is in fact dead. I mean, what really happened that night out in the swamp was the plants absorbed his consciousness and created this other being. So he is literally a plant that thinks it's a man. He's not a man that is now a plant. Even though that line was kind of I don't know if it was acting involved in that line or if it was how it was all set up, but it kind of fell flat for me, but I'm starting to understand it. And what I really liked is how they melded that over into everything going on at home with Woodrue. I mean, a lot of people walking away from this episode is this is a very Alec heavy episode. Well, I would counter, actually it's more Woodrue heavy because he's exploring this specimen that he's wanted for multiple episodes to actually take apart and everything and explore the science behind. And then on the flip side, you have Abby finally encounter Caroline, and it's just he doesn't realize that by keeping her at home by herself, he's not helping it. He's just making the disease worse. And by the end of it, she's taken her medicine. All of her medicine.
All of her medicine, yeah.
Which was a very eerie scene.
Yeah, it was. And it clearly is going to be the catalyst to drive him over the edge to become Floronic Man. And so, I'm glad you brought that up and reviewing, and preparing for the show. This story actually is actually taken straight from the comics. They pretty much adapted most of the, saga of the Swamp Thing number 21, which I think, I know the DC catalog is on the DC Universe app, so you could probably read it there if any listeners want to check it out. Everything that we saw in this episode, for the most part, did happen in the comic book, and so
except for the Blue Devil stuff, right?
Except for the Blue Devil stuff, correct. But and of course, the Matt having the accident did happen in the comics. And it was just sort of yeah.
Sorry, continue.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. You're to be forgiven. It was a very bipolar show. Episode 9 was, so it's fair. The Sunderland Sunderlands were a part of that. And so, so being the penultimate show and being so all over the place, you're completely right. It was like a journey to nowhere. I don't know where the journey's taken us for a penultimate show, because I just feel like the series has gone off in a different place than how it started off as, and now it's a very rushed finale, and a lot of the interesting dynamics and story that built up that made this such a gem, diamond in the rough show it's starting to tarnish a little bit.
I will say I probably enjoyed watching this more than Teen Titans.
Oh, I would agree.
Yeah, because Teen Titans had a lot of other issues, and for a majority of the season, the writers understood what what the show was and what story they were trying to tell. It's just towards the end, and I think you called it out really good a few weeks back when it's like, no, clearly the writers realized what was going to happen, and so that's why they're scrambling, and it's becoming a lot more manic. It is interesting though, because in comparison to Krypton, where these last few episodes, I have felt like every single episode was the penultimate episode. I was just like, whoa, this is clearly building to somewhere, and we just keep hiking this mountain, and I feel this momentum where we're going to eventually hit that breaking point, that climax, and it's going to be beautiful. And with this show, I'm just like, I don't really know what mountain we've climbed, and I already feel like I've gone over the other side. I'm doing extra laps now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wonder, Will, if maybe this show had dropped all at once, would we feel more invested? Because the way it's written, it hasn't aired on the side of procedural since probably the first few episodes. In this later half, it's been much more ongoing narrative building. So I just wonder, especially in comparison to Krypton, which I don't need to watch that in one sitting. I enjoy watching it week to week.
Yeah. I actually have liked the fact that this show has been up to this point once a week, because I think the thing is, and I know we'll talk about the boys later, there's with a very well done show, I feel that when you binge something that has some depth to it, sometimes you can miss some of the nuances of the story, because you're just absorbing it all at once, and then you just get sensory overload, and you're like, damn, this was good, but a lot of the depth and layers of the storytelling get lost in the binging, at least for me. So I can't, and I'd love to hear from folks if they feel the same way. So on the one hand, yeah, it's an endorphin rush. It's like, oh, I've been waiting for this series, and it's so awesome that it's on, and I can just get it all done at once. But on the other hand, I feel that when you do binge, when it's such a well done story, you do miss out on some of the layers and the nuances of it. So, so from that regard, that's one of the things I like. For example, Doom Patrol, having it come on once a week gave me a chance to really think back and appreciate some of the stuff and marinate on some of the things that happened during the story, so that when we talked about it, I felt like I could do so in a richer way than just trying to ram it through and then be like, oh, that was really good, and I like this and I like that, but not really give more textured discussions about it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a little bit differently just because I've had binges where I felt like because it was a binge watch, I appreciated everything a lot more than week to week where I have time to forget. or more importantly, then all of a sudden another thing catches my eye, and instead of wanting to return to this other show, I'm like, no, I'm too busy over here. So when you let time like that pass, you give opportunity for somebody to kind of put it on the back burner and then ultimately forget about it, depending on how it's written.
Yeah.
So it is interesting, though, that these days with all these streaming services, everybody's having such a different approach to their original content. Most are dropping it all at once, but now, like DC as well as Hulu, they drop episode by episode. I'm very curious to see what Disney will do, which approach they're going to take.
Yeah, I'm thinking they're probably going to. I think it depends on the show, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I think some shows I think The Mandalorian, they'll probably do it weekly. That's just my guess. Whereas some of the other things on their platform, they may just drop all at once.
I think TV is such a machine that they're gonna choose one approach, and despite it working better for another show or not, they're just gonna use it. It's too much of once you figure out the formula, you don't mess with it. So I foresee that.
Yeah. But to your point about about binging, I get your point about there's other shiny objects that are out there, but and honestly, now that we are to the point with Swamp Thing where it is all over the place, then yeah, it definitely is easier for something to like jump in and take that spot. Whereas a Doom Patrol, it's not getting dislodged.
Yeah, like, I don't know, maybe Amazon drops The Boys, and for some reason I thought it was going to be episode a week by week, and they dropped all 8 at once. I've only watched 4, and which is really interesting because I've had time to watch 8. I just haven't, and I honestly, I'm very mixed about this show.
Me too.
Because okay, that's good, because the way I see it is this is really good writing. Everything there, it's really an interesting world they've created. I mean, a lot of this, how they're twisting the celebrity culture we've developed over the last few years and applying it to superheroes and applying it to especially someone like Starlight, all of the mistreatment she's received on the show and her getting her dream come true only to find out that, it's toxic at the top. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. And anytime I start a new episode, I'm like, oh yeah, this is good. I think though it unnecessarily errs on the side of nudity, violence, blood, and aggression. Like, there's something about it where it just gets to a point where I'm like, really? Is that, we got it, like, I got it 5 minutes ago, but you're still going with this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, why are you mixed?
Well, I think the manufacturer's shock value for like we're going to basically take the tropes on their heads and we're going to do all the things that you just mentioned. For one, I think I do like the storytelling and I'm loving Billy the Butcher. I mean, Carl Urban. Just give me an hour of him. I'll be happy. I think some of I'm still having mixed feelings or how they treat women in the show. Because on the one hand, I feel like yes, they are like Starlight is a very strong protagonist, and the things that she learns about stardom and fame and everything, and the less, there was obviously, this is written in a Me Too culture, post Me Too world where we see the negativity of fame and stardom because she has her quote unquote casting couch experience with Deep.
Mm-hmm.
and him basically like, oh, him manipulating her like, oh, you had a crush on me. Well, come here and service me and all that kind of thing. So there's that. I mean, I've only watched 4 episodes, but
So you saw the Deep stealing the dolphin and that plan going really south real fast. I swear that is one of the biggest laughs this show got me, because the expression on his face as he's watching, as they slow it down and they were like, they slow-moed the dolphin coming out the window and you're just like, I don't know why it has to be so down, but it's hilarious.
Yeah, and I've got to rewatch episode 4 because I was like, by that point I was drifting in and out of sleep, but I did see that part and it did like laugh. But yeah, so that's where why I feel kind of mixed about it. And again, there's other places where Starlight is very powerful and very strong. And then Elizabeth Shue's character, the COO behind Vault. Now, that's another person I could like just see her machinations. Sit me down for an hour for that. I'm there for that as well, because her character, even though it's just evil and just exposes the cynical, ugly side of corporate world, I mean, she just plays it so well.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I think Starlight is that decisive character in this show, and it kind of took me off guard because I thought it would be more Huey, but it really turned into like either sometimes you like Starlight, sometimes you don't like her, sometimes her plot point is really poignant, sometimes it falls flat. And I just can't get out of my head that actress also played a critical character in the first season of Jessica Jones.
That's right.
Yeah, and so it's really interesting how now she's on this show and everything. But I can't not see that when I watch her, so I tend to just it's not my favorite part of the show. And Huey is also a character that I'm like kind of still on the fence about, because they keep doing that stupid thing where he starts breathing really deeply and then you don't know what he's going to do, or like all the anxiety and the tension. And I'm just like, why do they keep doing that? There has to be a reason, and I'm sure it's something that's going to be like, oh my God. But it just is starting to really irritate me, because it's like you keep doing the same trick again and again and again. But it was really, I understand why the show has gotten the hype that it got after last week, because in the first episode, when in the first 5 minutes somebody literally gets run through, and that sequence was really well done. I mean, the CGI and the special effects on the show is on point. Yeah,
it is, and I guess Robin's demise is another thing. Well, I know this is taken from a source material, but it would have been why, and I guess this is why this show works as far as and points out the cynical nature of it is, here it is, another damsel in distress, female victim, and so it does like play on those old classic superhero tropes that we've seen in the past, and so that was a very startling like kickstart to the series, and it basically set the tone for like, okay, here's what you guys are in for, and then as the episode progresses, and I think it was maybe episode 3 where Huey had the little Funko Pop of A-Train, and he threw it across the room, and also another moment, spoiler alert, where he and A-Train, after the apology, which we need to talk about the apology as well, but after the apology where he encounters A-Train in his apartment, and A-Train's just sort of like, I don't know who you are. I see so many people, and it gets to that point about celebrity culture and pop culture and hero worship, and how sometimes your heroes can let you down, or when you actually meet them, you realize that these people are really dicks.
That's the tagline for this show. You realize that, right? Never meet your heroes.
Yeah.
That's what they sold in on. Why do you want to talk about the apology?
Well, I mean, I think I just touched on it. I mean, just the shallowness of it, and the soulless corporate culture that this world has constructed in the boys, and also how it reminds me of like the things we see on Twitter where some actor or politician or celebrity says, "If I offended, I am sorry."
Mm-hmm.
And that was, they didn't use those words, but they pretty much captured that sentiment, because if you truly were sorry, you wouldn't have prefaced it with the weasel words, "If I offended anyone."
Yeah, I mean, clearly that's scripted.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, even like in a normal day to day, sometimes I'll hear that and I'll be like, clearly you're missing the point of what an apology is, or what saying you're sorry or wanting forgiveness. And clearly you don't understand what you did wrong. So I don't know why I'm talking to you anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
I see the A-Train stuff. And I agree with you. The moment in the hallway after the apology was really brilliant, because even as a viewer, it caught me off guard. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, but still, really? Really? But it was more everything with Homelander.
Oh, yeah.
That, especially in the fourth episode, and the fourth episode really is like, no, this is why Billy has a problem with these heroes. There's clearly another story there, but no, these Homelander, there's something wrong with him, and there is, even though he is so smart at the end of that episode, what he tells the reporters and how he plays it. And I mean, that's what happens. Like, we see this every day with our politicians. We see this with celebrities and everything. You get to a point where you've been in this machine that you understand how publicity works. You know what to say, what not to say, how to twist things. Mm-hmm. And Maeve also in that whole sequence was really interesting. And I wish that they would stop focusing so much on Starlight and focus more on Maeve, because knowing that those two previously dated, he also has this weird fetish for the boss. It just, there's so much more to mine in that, because at the end of the day, she also got off that plane, and she did used to date him, and what happened, and why aren't they still together, and also why does she still put up with his BS? It's really probably because politically she would agree with him on some stuff, but I hope that they focus more on her in season 2.
I hope so too, and I think it's in the contract. I mean, as far as these folks having to get together, get along. True.
I mean, headquarters signed off on it. The thing though that this show did not establish well enough for me is because whenever we see the 7, quote unquote, they always seem to lose right now. I have yet to actually see them save anybody. I'm sure there's like these random news reports every now and then, but not really. And so I'm just like, it's interesting how the writers chose not to do that world building and to focus more on like, no, we've established who these people are. It's not about building them up as superheroes so we can rip them down. It's more like, no, from the get-go, these are bad people, and they have very bad motives for doing what they're doing, and they can self-justify. And I think we've talked about this on other shows. I think we even talked about it when we were talking about Thanos a few years ago in Infinity, where it's with self-justification that really gets under your skin, and it's like, this is not a good person.
It's not a good person. And I think, but I don't think, I think the reason, and why they don't need to show them saving everyone is because that's the facade. I mean, that's like, for example, with Starlight attacking the two rapists in the parking lot, and then at first the publicist was like, just ripped her a new one for like doing that, especially when she was like in her quote unquote secret identity. And then the corporate machine was like, okay, here's how we're going to spin it. Here's how we're going to, and that scene with the two creative guys like trying to spin the story was just as far as what happened that night. And then that was just, again, just one of the things I do like about this series is just pointing out how easy it is to manipulate a story and to put it in a light that will fit into the narrative of Starlight being this hero who has saved the day once again. So I'm glad they're not I'm glad they're showing the true underbelly of like these flawed superheroes instead, because we know the story of DC and Marvel as far as these flawless beings. We see that all the time for the most part in traditional media of these characters. Now, obviously here recently we've seen some of the more darker elements, but overall they're still treated as goody two shoes.
It's nice to have, I mean, before we were talking about Swamp Thing, we were talking about how it was manic. In this show, there's a lot of characters, a lot going on, yet it feels very whole because they have done a very clever thing where you have the real exploration of the superhero underbelly. I love how you articulated that. And then on the other hand, you also have The Boys, which is really has an R-rated Ocean's 11 vibe to it. You know, where these random everyday people all know that the soups are up to no good, so they're really going about their way and trying to figure out how to tap phones and how to get in on the inside. And there's Ocean, and they're a band of characters, so it feels very Ocean's 11 like spy thriller going on. And you know, they toss in a few girls who are clearly crazy, very powerful, but psycho, and you know, a guy's head will explode.
Yeah.
Unnecessary.
Yeah, that was that'll definitely show. I loved how it was the line that got me after that, as far as how it would show up on Fetish cam on the internet was fun. But yeah, that was. I was like, oh, I didn't see that one coming.
I like how as a viewer, because during that whole sequence they keep panning back to the boys in the car, and like their expressions had to match everybody else's as we're all watching this, and we're like, what? Yeah,
pretty much. Pretty much. That and the senator getting framed, but
yeah, I mean. And I think that's necessary, like, to be juggling everything that's going on with all of these different characters and clearly having their own arcs, and yet you're still able to have the deep capture a dolphin and it makes sense for the plot. You still are able to have that whole weird erotic sequence happen and be like, you know what? This is a show. This is The Boys.
Yep.
But I'm also, I'm still trying to figure out, and maybe with the last 4 episodes, it'll come to me this next week, what it is about this where I'm also not dying to watch the next one right away.
Yeah. No, I'm not either. I mean, I mean, I'm enjoying it, and, you know, get back to our earlier discussion, I think I would have been okay if this didn't drop all at once.
Me too.
It was just rolled out as a weekly show.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But we will finish watching it and hopefully talk about it next week and talk about how it all ends. And it is already cleared for season 2, so we know that there's going to be some build up for what's to come. All right, and a show we are definitely glad because I couldn't watch this in one sitting. I would forget stuff, but is dropping week to week, and there's still 3 episodes left, which blows my mind. I feel like so much has happened, and there's 3 episodes left.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Krypton Season 2, Episode 7 of Zod and Monsters. Doomsday.
Yeah. Where to begin?
Yeah. Well, where I want to begin is, I don't know if you picked up on this, very Captain Marvel-esque sequence occurs in this TV show, in this episode, because you have Zod with all of his brainwashing technology try to tap into Doomsday through his memories to manipulate him.
Yeah.
You've seen this before.
Seen it before? Yes, we have. Yes, we have. It worked, but it works just as well here as it did in the other format.
I agree. I mean, I liked it. I liked the backdrop. I forgot that in season 1 it was explained that the Zods and the L's co-created Doomsday, and I remembered that. It took me a little bit, but I did remember that as we were watching the flashback sequences. We find out, much like Swamp Thing, Doomsday is a creature who had love, and then through this process ends up having his love abandon him. So he's basically a heartbroken individual, which is prime for Zod to just manipulate the shit out of. Yeah,
and he has the perfect tool to be able to manipulate him, and the fact that it was the L's who created him.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the Zods were in that room.
Yeah, but the L's, one of the things that really sold this particular plot point for me was the Zods were the ones who were advocating for that experiment for the L's to stop the experiment because it was so harmful to Dax Baron.
Right.
And
now,
which as we talked about before, is one of the strongest things about this show is those shades of gray. Not everyone's a saint, because it was the L's here who just kept pushing forward, and really were the monsters in the room this time, not the Zods.
Which just further proves the theory that Val is a Cylon.
Yeah. Holographic. You called it weeks back, and here we are. The progeny of Val, basically, they're Cylon.
No, I understand what you're picking up on, and I do like that as well. I did like that twist. I couldn't help but try to think to myself, is this what actually happened, or are we already seeing this memory after it's been tainted by Zod? Is he already planting those seeds? Because
good point.
At the same time, because Zods are the house of the warriors, so they're the people who will always sacrifice their country above everything else. So for that character to express that emotion of sorrowness, I felt like was out of character. The L's, on the other hand, I was not surprised that they wanted to continue, because when you do come from science, experimentation, you understand, at the end of the day, the ends sometimes can justify the means, especially if you're right, and which they were. They created this beast, they broke apart this man, but it was the key to ultimately win the war. Yeah.
Yeah. It was her actions were very dispassionate. It was not, and it was in a very twisted way as far as from a humanitarian standpoint, but from a logical standpoint, as you rightly point out, it made sense.
Yeah, and she did give off a little bit of that Brainiac vibe, you throw out the word logic, and instantly I'm like, oh, she must have some Brainiac in her too.
Yeah.
Oh,
well, that would explain a lot. Yeah.
Man, Brainiac is such a backseat driver. That's all I thought during the first half of this episode. I'm just like, he's just chilling back there, popping in, like, you need to go right, Seg, you need to go left, you need to turn this bus around. And then he just starts to take over, he's like, screw this, you can't drive, let me.
Yeah, I'm taking the wheel.
taking the wheel, and he literally does, and which leads to Nyssa to have to perform a surgery on the brainstem. I am starting to get a point where I'm like, how many episodes are we going to continue to see them try to extract Brainiac from Seg?
Oh, they did it. This was it.
Okay, this was it. Okay, because if it comes up again,
this was the episode. Because that's why. Yeah, so they went to the Fortress of Solitude to basically use the technology there to extract Brainiac from Seg. So yeah, we won't be seeing that dynamic anymore unless there's like some residual engrams or whatever from Brainiac left in Seg. But but the way this episode ended, they are apart.
Freaking baby snatcher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because this also, during this part in the fortress, we also see Nyssa decide that they need to rename Corvax. And not only does he need to have the L last name, but the Cylon Val, or the hologram Val.
The more interesting Val.
Informs them that they also need to change his first name, and then thus Jor-El is born.
Yeah, which I think we speculated that this would possibly be the outcome for that child.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't know how you would get there, considering he was Corvax for a long time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But now he's Jor-El, and a very triumphant moment, only to 5 minutes later have that baby ripped from his parents. And Brainiac's like, you know what? My heart's broken because Seg clearly has told me that he's straight and we will never get together. So I'm going to steal his son. And the true best of Krypton lies in the blood of the L. So he takes Jor-El, and boy, Nyssa just really brought that motherless child moment.
Yeah, that was whenever when I was watching the episode Wednesday night, and Brainiac took over the fortress and then ripped Jor-El away, I was like, what the I was like, what the fuck moment. I was angry. I was like, really? Y'all did this? Did you really? You did this to us? But the other thing about that moment too is Brainiac says he's going to honor his agreement with Seg.
What agreement?
I think if I had to go back and look, I had to try to remember one of the earlier episodes this season. I think as far as Brainiac not interfering with Krypton anymore, if I recall. But he is still, I don't know if he was going to bottle up Kandor, but he did one worse. He just took the best of the L's and took Jor-El, which gets to our larger point as far as with the time travel and all this other stuff, and Adam's Strange's mission of ultimately saving Kal-El, Superman. So if Brainiac takes Jor-El to safety,
get out the whiteboard, everybody. Will's got a problem to figure out.
Yeah, well, I don't have. Yeah, get it. The problem. I'm just putting things on the whiteboard right now. I don't have a solution, but I'm still working towards a solution. As far as how this fits into the overall story, as far as what the basic premise of the first season was to basically preserve the line so that Kal-El could be born.
I think it's more of a setup for season 3. I think that because this this season we've talked about it, like it's really fascinating and really tells you how good the writer's room the show has, because they are able to balance everything going on with Zod, with Doomsday, with Brainiac all at once, and it makes sense. So I think that this was a very definitive moment where we have a setup or a linchpin to take us into the third season, where the first part of the third season is them trying to find Brainiac and Jor-El and get Jor-El back. Because, I mean, Nissa's going to want to go right ahead, but there's still war happening right now in Kandor that has to get resolved. Really, they have to figure out what to do with Drew Zod and get him back to where he was supposed to be all this time, bring back Lyta. So they got some time travel stuff to work out, but...
Well, see, they have to bring back Lyta, I guess, for Drew Zod to be born, I guess.
As Sarah's pointed out in weeks past, and for once I wasn't the one to bring that up. Thank you. Because I don't know, for this episode I wasn't thinking about how, Lyta, I honestly forgot about Lyta in this episode. Maybe it's because we didn't see Jaina, we didn't see Dev, and there were a few scenes where Lyta was brought up in her sacrifice, but I was so sucked in on learning about Doomsday, figuring out what Drew was going to do, and then everything with Brainiac that I was like, Lyta who?
Lyta, yeah, you're right. So maybe she, that's a very good point. And we, I think we're starting to get some more of your seg, and this is it, shipping.
Well, if it's the mother of Jor-El, then I was right.
Well, yeah, you were right. So you got your ship right there.
No, and it's not like I don't like Lyta, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm also not saying like, hey, I miss her, they don't need to bring her back. I'm not saying that at all, because she is a fascinating character. It is just interesting how we go from two really Lyta heavy episodes to this one, seamless transition, and I'm not stuck on it because I've already gone through the grieving process with Seg, and other things have to get done because there are only 3 episodes left.
There's only 3 episodes left, but we do have the reconditioning of Doomsday by Zod, which you made a very good point earlier about. I didn't even think that the visions that we are seeing, maybe that is the method he is going to, that's what we're seeing, is him conditioning him to hate the elves and be able to use him to, carry out his conquering goals, and that makes total sense now that you raised that point.
Yeah, it's taking the scenic route to get the job done. If only Drew Zod realized that in order to hate the elves, you have to lock Doomsday in a room with Val, and then you would succeed.
Yeah, not holographic Sal, but
no.
But yeah. Speaking of, but you make a good point too as far as stories. I just wanted to go back to Wegthor for just a quick moment with Kim and his growth. This episode, poor Adam was just kind of like, well, what about me? I'm just here. I'm still relevant, right? Because
Adam, who always needs to be paired up with someone so he can play that character, that lost boy type character. There's another way to put it, but the kid who wants to be at the top but is never given that approval. So they pair him up with Kim. At first I was like, no, I miss the old Sag and Adam team up. I still do. But by the end of the episode, I was like, yeah, Kim and Adam can do just fine. Just minimize the Val interaction and you have my vote.
Yeah. if you guys hadn't noticed, Sarah's not a big fan of Val.
Actually, it's just the perfect punchline for me these days. I didn't mind him in this episode. It's so funny to me how much trash talking of Val we do. I don't know why.
But I did like the stories there with Kim, and just, going from a barkeep to now commander, but it was just enough of it in the episode to remind us of what's going on in Wegthor, but didn't detract from everything else that was going on. I mean, from the iconic music being played when we get the unveiling of Jor-El, to even, we always have to have Cameron do one callback to an earlier Superman actor motion or whatever. With this week, it was, the Superman pose with the crest of the House of El whenever he put on the shirt with the emblem. So, there's all those nice little moments that the show has really, for me at least, it has gotten me interested in Superman again as a character.
Yeah. I mean, that is the saving grace of this show, is that for so long I've been a Batman person, but in watching Krypton, Superman starts to become so much more interesting, and now I'm getting excited for Kingdom Come Superman during the next crossover with the CW shows, that I do appreciate it. I mean, who knew? If you take the character out of the world, he becomes that much more better.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it really has. And I'm like, this show has really fleshed out Superman from this very kind of boring character for me to such a rich world that this is how you do a good prequel.
I also like how they are doing what they're doing with the villains, because they're able to really create these backstories. So if down the lines, if DC ever gets their shit together and actually pulls off good cinematic movies, then these characters could pop up, and suddenly as a viewer, I'm like, oh, that's Brainiac. So cool. I know all about him. Oh, they redid the Doomsday storyline, so it actually aligns with the Krypton mythos. Yay!
Yay, exactly.
I was thinking about this. I'm like, man, I wonder if there's any shade here towards what Zack Snyder did with Doomsday.
I think it is. Because the story here definitely lines up a lot closer to what was in the comic than that abomination we saw in Batman v Superman.
Yeah. Literally Abomination 2.0. It's not even like they did it. I still can't get over that trailer where it just announces to the world the third act of that movie, and I'm like, really? They did that? Wow. Whoever was in charge of that marketing campaign, they sure should get fired. Yep. So, but you're absolutely right that this show really is what I think a lot of us have needed to reinvest, to get back on board with Superman as a character, as someone who brings a lot to the table. I mean, honestly, watching this show and then in the fall watching Supergirl, I think is what has made that Superman character that much more bigger, because now we understand the history. We also understand a lot more of the social implications around it through Supergirl. So, yeah, I'm like I said before, Kingdom Come. It's coming.
Yes, it is. It is indeed.
All right. Well, that's it for us today. Will, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yes, you can find me at Will M. Polk. That's WILLMPOLK.
And you can find me at Twitter at SJ Belmont, SJBELMONT. Please follow our crew on Twitter at CNN Nerd. Friend us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, but most importantly, rate, subscribe, and comment on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Spotify. Good night, Geek Out. You're welcome.